Tonight, just 2 days after Americans cast their votes.
Both parties are still holding out for a victory. Many analysts predicted a red wave, but that wave never made it ashore.
Senate control is still up for grabs, and the House, though undecided, is likely to change hands.
This is Your Vote, Your Voice, a BUTV 10 midterm election special.
Welcome to Your Vote, Your Voice. I am Dowd.
And I'm Laney Broussard. Midterm elections often act as a referendum on the party in power. And on Tuesday night, we got mixed signals across the board. In the House of Representatives, Republicans captured a narrow victory, flipping just 13 seats to gain a 4-seat majority. High-profile Republicans even lost seats, with Trump ally Colorado Representative Lauren Boebert losing her re-election bid to Democrat Adam Frisch.
And it wasn't as big a victory as many had hoped in the Republican Party. Still, soon-to-be House Majority Leader Kevin McCarthy said early Wednesday morning that Republicans will deliver a new direction.
It's a new direction towards an economy that is strong, where you can fill up your tank, feed your family, where your paychecks grow and not shrink. A new direction towards a nation that is safe, where communities are protected, law enforcement is respected, and criminals are prosecuted. Republicans will work with anyone who's willing to join us to deliver this new direction.
The Democrats held a majority last term, but several representatives chose not to run for re-election, leaving 49 seats without an incumbent. Despite not knowing the results of key races that could determine the balance of power in Congress, President Biden still considered the midterms a success.
Look, while votes are being counted, we don't know the outcome of all the races. Here's what we do know. We lost fewer seats in the House of Representatives than any Democratic president's first elected midterm, at least 40 years. We had the best midterms for governors since 1986. And experts said we couldn't beat the odds, but we did beat the odds.
In Congress's upper chamber, the race was much tighter, with Democrats picking up big wins in Pennsylvania and New Hampshire, while Republicans grabbed victory in Ohio and Wisconsin. The Senate is currently 50-50, with Vice President Kamala Harris as the tiebreaker. All eyes are now on Georgia, which is headed to a Senate runoff between incumbent Raphael Warnock and Republican Herschel Walker. For more details on the Georgia contest and a handful of other races across the country, we're going to turn it over to our resident map analyst, Mark Gildenhuys. Mark, can you tell me a little bit more about what made this state so competitive?
I absolutely can, Alex. We're going to start up here in the great Keystone State of Pennsylvania. Candidates just battled it out to fill Senator Pat Toomey's seat. Democratic nominee Lieutenant Governor John Fetterman squeaked out a narrow victory over Republican nominee Dr. Mehmet Oz after being neck and neck all the way into the final stretch of this race. Now, Fetterman suffered a stroke in May, which hindered his performance on the campaign trail and was used as ammunition by Republicans to question his capability to serve. Trump-backed Dr. Oz was still edged out by Fetterman's nearly 4% margin, flipping a longtime Republican seat blue and locking down a key race in the Democrats' quest to hold the Senate. Now, as we look out over in Ohio, Republican author J.D. Vance took a big win over Democratic Representative Tim Ryan. Vance, whose endorsement from former President Trump propelled him through his primary, has made his opposition to abortion a front of this campaign, as well as his rejection of the 2020 election. Ryan clashed with Vance on issues like the loss of Ohio's manufacturing jobs, but struggled to overcome Vance's pull among white blue-collar workers. Ohio is a part of a handful of swing states that former President Trump has had a solid grip on since 2016, and because of that, Vance was able to hold on to the battleground state. Now, as we look a little bit further west, we can see out in Arizona, the race between Democratic candidate Mark Kelly and his opponent Blake Masters is still undecided. 76% of the votes are counted, and Mark Kelly is leading by 6 points, an auspicious lead for the incumbent senator. Polls got real tight after Libertarian candidate Mark Victor dropped out of the race and endorsed Republican Masters early last week. Despite that, majority support for Kelly has stayed consistent since June 2022. Kelly ran on a platform of emphasizing boosting the economy, upgrading water resources, and addressing challenges along the Arizona-Mexico border. Masters, meanwhile, insisted that Kelly hasn't stood against President Biden as he said he would, and claims he's been soft on immigration. Now, as we switch over to Georgia, we can see that the incumbent Senator Raphael Warnock is headed to a runoff with Republican challenger Herschel Walker. This race was crucial in deciding Democratic control in 2020 and is again the state that both Democrats and Republicans are just hanging their hopes for Senate control on. Warnock held a narrow lead over Walker in recent polls. Walker's campaign became the site of multiple controversies. The Trump-endorsed candidate faced public backlash for accusations that he'd allegedly paid for the abortions of 2 previous partners. He, of course, has denied that, but after those allegations, early October polls showed that Walker lost some support from Republican voters. Despite that, Walker managed to hold on to enough of the electorate to force a runoff on December 6th. Alex, Laney, I'll send it over back to you.
Thank you so much, Mark. Georgia will remain a mystery for the time being. Nevada and Arizona's races are still undecided, as is control of the Senate. Republicans only need 2 seats to flip in the majority for theirs to be in favor.
For what this means for our nation, BUTV 10 reporter Evmorfia Alton sat down with Tammy Veal, a BU media science professor.
Thank you so much for joining us today, Professor Veal. We're very happy to have you here. So let's get right down to this election. Republicans didn't have as big of a night as predicted, with the Senate still a toss-up and Republicans projected to win the House by slim votes. What was your immediate reaction to the election night results, and why haven't we seen this red wave that was initially predicted?
Well, I wasn't surprised necessarily at the fact that the red wave hadn't been the tsunami that some folks had been predicting, because if you looked at some of the polling data and you think about the ways in which people are voting, it's challenging to make the predictions that everybody was making. For example, mid-September, Democrats were well ahead. It wasn't until November 1st when there was basically a 50-50 split, when it was just as likely to go either direction. So we're really only talking about the last week or so when it seemed like the Republicans were really going to surge.
Along with that, the midterm election is traditionally seen as somewhat of a reflection on the president in power. What do you think the results that we've seen thus far mean for Biden as he might consider a re-election bid?
Oftentimes people will talk about it as a referendum on the presidency and how it's going and those kinds of things. Yet, historically, the way that the trends work, almost always, if there's a party in control, they almost always lose control during a midterm, right? There's going to be a shift because people are dissatisfied or because people just want some change or because the voters don't always want any one party to be in particular power. In this particular case, I think the conversation about what was going on, key topics, inflation, abortion, all of those kinds of issues were brought to the forefront.
There's also speculation that former President Trump will announce a bid for the 2024 election in the coming month. What do you think this election will do in regards to that?
That's an excellent question. I know he has teased this big announcement that's going to be happening in a few days. And so I think it's going to really give him pause. I think it would give him a little bit of pause. On the one hand, he knows he can kind of rally his own troops. He can get his base fired up almost at will. The question is, how far beyond his own base can he go, and how big is that base now?
Well, thank you so much for taking the time to sit down with us. We
My
loved
pleasure.
hearing everything you had to say.
Right. Well, thank you for having me.
Thank you, Evmorfia. That was BUTV 10 reporter Evmorfia Alton. To continue, let's head on back to Georgia with the help of Mark Gildenhuys to go through the biggest gubernatorial races. Mark?
Thank you again, Alex. We're back in Georgia, where incumbent Brian Kemp took on and defeated Democrat Stacey Abrams for the second time. Abrams gave Kemp a close run back in 2018, but Kemp decisively won their rematch by just over 7 points. Despite going against former President Trump's campaign to overturn the 2020 elections, Kemp maintained support from Republican voters, which may have helped him stay in the lead. On the issues, there is absolutely no overlap between the two candidates. They've disagreed on everything, including gun laws, abortion, Georgia's election laws, and the state budget. Heading into Election Day, Abrams trailed by 7.7 points on the incumbent governor, so the results are no real surprise. As we look over here to the Lone Star State, there is more pain in store for Democrats. Greg Abbott has earned himself a third term in office after defeating Democratic challenger Beto O'Rourke. This is in line with a UT Austin poll from this month that showed Abbott leading by 11% over his Democratic opponent. Apologies for the graphic, it's meant to read 43%. Now back to it, this was O'Rourke's third race in 6 years, after failing in his bid to defeat Senator Ted Cruz in 2018 and dropping out of the 2020 presidential race. Abbott and the stance he's held on gun control have made state leadership a major focus following the Uvalde shooting tragedy. Abbott's also been a controversial figure at the national level for Texas's restrictive abortion law. And despite O'Rourke's progressive policy changes, it's just not been enough to galvanize the voter base. Now, as we look over toward Arizona, Republican candidate Kari Lake and her Democratic opponent Katie Hobbs are still neck and neck in this nail-biting race. Right now, Hobbs is leading by about 20,000 votes with 76% of the vote in. Support for Lake soared after she was endorsed by Donald Trump and ran a platform backing his claims of election fraud and supporting the overturn of Roe v. Wade. Hobbs, on the other hand, was Secretary of State when Trump was lobbing accusations of election fraud toward Arizona. We're watching the results with great interest, as Lake has strongly implied she will contest losing results. Let's finish this off over in Maine, a state that's become increasingly competitive over the past few years. The governor's mansion was on the line between current governor and Democrat Janet Mills and former governor Paul LePage, a Republican. LePage finished his second term in 2018 and ran again because Maine limits candidates to consecutive terms with no overall limit. Maine became the first state to implement ranked choice voting for statewide elections in 2018, and many argued that it passed due to widespread dissatisfaction with both LePage's elections, where he failed to secure an outright majority. This year, there definitely was a majority. Democrat Janet Mills won with 54% of the vote, ensuring another 4 years of Democratic leadership in the state. That's all from me tonight. Alex, Laney, take it away.
Thanks again, Mark. That was Mark Gildenhuys, our resident map analyst.
Turning now to Massachusetts, Maura Healey won her race to be the next governor of the state, defeating Republican nominee Jeff Deal by 28 points to become the first elected female and openly lesbian governor of Massachusetts.
Supporters gathered at downtown Boston on Tuesday evening to ring in the new governor. And BUTV 10 reporter Stephanie Joseph was on the scene. Let's take a look.
To all of you, and to all of you out there, with the help of so many, we made history, didn't we? We made history.
Massachusetts elected Attorney General Maura Healey as governor Tuesday night. Healey secured an early victory over her Republican opponent Jeff Deal hours after polls closed. Her leadership brings new representation to the state's highest office.
I stand before you tonight proud to be the first woman and the first gay person ever elected governor of Massachusetts.
Healey's win also marks the first time the state will have a Democratic governor since 2015, and she becomes the nation's first openly lesbian U.S. governor. Voters say they resonated with her diverse background and look forward to Healey amplifying marginalized voices.
I'm personally, I identify as bisexual, and I think having someone in office that's not, the typical straight white man is a very big step no matter what party they're in. And I think it's also really inspiring for a lot of communities that don't necessarily see representation as often as they should.
Healey was elected alongside a slate of other female candidates, most of whom joined her to celebrate on election night. Healey will lead Massachusetts with her Lieutenant Governor, Kim Driscoll, at a crucial time in the state and the nation when many have been divided over the economy and abortion rights.
Our job from day one will be to make our state more affordable. I'll be a governor for every person struggling with higher costs. And as long as I'm governor, women will always have the freedom to control their own bodies.
Supporters say they believe Healey and Driscoll can unite the Commonwealth and bring change.
She's able to work with anybody, and hopefully this logjam that we have on state levels and on the national level of policy not moving forward because everyone's infighting, that hopefully she'll be able to kind of fix that.
The governor-elect isn't waiting until January to get started. She says her first line of business will be meeting with Governor Baker tomorrow to address the Commonwealth's most pressing needs. Here at the Fairmont Copley Plaza, I'm Stephanie Joseph for BUTV 10.
Thanks, Stephanie. Right now, I want to go to Jane Swift, the former Lieutenant Governor of Massachusetts, who served as acting governor from 2001 to 2003. After being the youngest woman ever elected to the Massachusetts State Senate, she became the first woman to serve as governor in the state's history. And now, she's here with us today. Thank you for joining us, former Governor Jane Swift.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So I want to go ahead and get right into it. While you celebrate Maura Healey's win as a major move for women, at Maura Healey's watch party Tuesday night, people were energized and hopeful for what change she might bring. With all of this momentum going into her term, how do you see Maura Healey impacting the state during her time as governor?
So I think that will remain to be seen. I think what's really exciting is we elected not just a woman to governor for the first time ever elected, but we also have a woman lieutenant governor. I believe we're the first state in the country to have a woman as governor and as lieutenant governor. And for Massachusetts, which lagged behind so many other states for so long in our women's representation, and for me as a mother of 3 daughters, it is just so exciting. And so I think with all but one of our constitutional officers, which are such visible leadership positions, being held by women, there will be powerful leadership images that will be presented. So our daughters will just have many more opportunities to aspire to leadership in their own lives.
And as the first woman to perform the duties of governor in Massachusetts, I mean, you know firsthand what it feels like to hold executive office on Beacon Hill. Now, Healey is our state's first elected female governor and the nation's first openly lesbian candidate, who I also must add is overseeing a majority female executive slate. How do you see this affecting her time as governor and some of the opposition she might face?
So my hope has always been that at some point, this doesn't become a story, that is just the norm, that we have women assuming leadership positions in politics, in business, in nonprofits, in education. And then it becomes about what the people who are elected, appointed, brought into these positions are doing.
And we talked about Healey for a brief second, but I want to take a moment to look at the other side of this election. There was Trump-backed Republican candidate Jeff Deal, who was trying to keep the office in the hands of the GOP. And I'm curious to know, why do you think the results of this election in particular favored Healey over Deal?
So I think that we saw across the country where my party, the Republican Party, strayed too far from our core values around limited government, around making sure that we are a check and a balance, around appropriate taxation, around enabling small businesses to thrive, and got into a lot more really things that have nothing to do with being a conservative Republican, around just things that are more about President Trump, former President Trump's personality, not just in Massachusetts, around the country. Those candidates lost.
Thank you so much, former Governor Swift. I really appreciate you joining us, and thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Let's continue to take a closer look at the races here in Massachusetts.
As Maura Healey took the top spot from Republicans, Democrats delivered another big upset to the GOP on Beacon Hill. They retained an overwhelming supermajority in the state House, with Democrats winning 35 of all 40 state Senate seats. They also earned more than 120 of the 160 House seats available. This was expected, as most races were uncontested and allowed many incumbents to resume office.
The state put women in power this election by choosing its first all-woman ticket for governor and lieutenant governor. Andrea Campbell made history in her race, becoming the first Black attorney general in the Bay State. In the race for auditor, Diana DiZoglio maintained her polling lead over Republican Anthony Amore, who was endorsed by Governor Charlie Baker.
Looking at the Secretary of the Commonwealth, Bill Galvin held the office since 1994, and he will continue to lead in the role at divisive times like this, as issues like voting rights and election security force officials like him into the spotlight.
The State House was an easy win for Democrats on Tuesday, many of whom ran unopposed. BUTV 10's Evan Jimenez spoke to Katie Lannon of WGBH to break down the new blood on Beacon Hill.
Katie Lannon, thank you so much for joining us. So in an election where nationally Democrats were facing terrible odds, Democrats in Massachusetts did about as well as could be expected and completed a near clean sweep of state politics. How does this reflect on the Republican Party in Massachusetts? And why do you think they weren't able to reach more voters?
Yeah, it's kind of an interesting thing here because even though Democrats nationally were facing these kind of dire projections, right? Massachusetts, the polling suggested consistently throughout the year that there would be a Democratic sweep here. That was the status quo throughout the whole election, really. And that's what we did see end up happening. happening, both at the statewide level and in the legislature.
So you wrote a piece on Monday about Secretary of State Bill Galvin talking about how he didn't expect a very high voter turnout, and he actually compared it to a midterm exam over a midterm choice, so to speak. You know, with the past two elections having relatively low voter turnout, what do you think politicians in the Bay State have to do to really encourage voters to come out to the polls?
Yeah, I think we're seeing younger voters really becoming a driving force in turnout. It's kind of a largely untapped base there for a lot of folks because, you know, a lot of candidates often speak past the younger voters or don't go where they are to reach them. So that's one area. The other thing is, you know, we've had these really weedy ballot questions this time around, which is what the secretary was referring to when he talked about it feeling like an exam you have to study for. Those are not necessarily things that are going to get voters jazzed up. Things like changing the particulars of dental insurance or how liquor licenses are available to retailers. So I think we're really going to be looking for candidates who can speak directly to voters about issues that matter to them.
So I want to finish off by talking about the record-breaking nature of Tuesday night. In Massachusetts, we saw the first fully female executive slate elected in state's history, and now we have 5 of 6 statewide roles filled by women. How much of a milestone is that for Massachusetts, and what do you think it means for the future of Massachusetts politics?
So there's been really a kind of gradual shift. The state's political circles are still overwhelmingly male and overwhelmingly white when you count, you know, the members of the legislature. But there is a gradual shift that's been happening here for years. You know, look at Elizabeth Warren was the first woman elected to the Senate, so from Massachusetts, and that was not that long ago. That was, you know, certainly within the time I've been working in news, and you have seen these milestones happen bit by bit. And I think we're only going to see more gains for women's representation, for people of color, and other types of diversity in the state house. But it is a slow path. And as it happens, you do see different issues brought to the forefront and different perspectives on leadership and issues that matters and different constituencies represented. So I think we'll only see that continue.
Katie Laney, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks, Evan. And thanks again to Katie Laney from WGBH. As she mentioned, history was made here in Massachusetts on Tuesday night. As voters flocked to the polls in Boston, we wanted to get a sense of how they were feeling. BUTV 10's Freddie Hassett was in downtown Boston late on election night to find out.
It's election day, and tonight we went out to the polls at the Wang YMCA of Chinatown to discuss with voters what has motivated them to turn out this November. Many now cast their ballots by mail, but those that do vote in person have a lot to say.
Both of my parents are immigrants, and one got her citizenship like 5 years ago, maybe, so she hasn't been able to vote for most of my life, so it's been like exciting for her, definitely, and like we all show our stickers in our family group chat, so yeah.
Before I wrestled a lot on, I'm going to vote yes. One, I voted, going to vote yes. I thought a lot of that, and 2 and 3 are more easy for me to vote yes.
I think that having identification is very important to be able to function in Massachusetts, in the United States in general, and I think that anyone should be able to have access to that because it opens up a whole host of opportunities, whether it be jobs, living situations, education, XYZ.
Having more of the insurance dollars steered to actual patient care as opposed to administration, I was more than in favor of. If there was an option to put super yes in favor of that, I would have.
Massachusetts, for somewhere that likes to tout itself as such a progressive state, doesn't have a progressive income tax.
You know, if you're clearing over $1 million a year, an extra 4% on that amount after $1 million isn't going to be that harmful.
Massachusetts is a very wealthy state, but there are huge discrepancies in where the funding is actually applied, and of course it's based on taxing and income in any particular region, so I think it would be nice to see it provide a more equitable public education across the state.
For BUTV 10, I'm Freddie Hassett.
Thanks for that, Freddie. In this election, policies reigned supreme in voters' minds. concerns about the economy to the proposed millionaire's tax right here in Massachusetts dominated headlines in the lead up to Election Day.
To make sense of just how much those policies impacted voters and how well politicians did or did not use them to their advantage, we'll turn it over to BUTV 10's Kiara Smith. She's standing by with representatives from BU College Democrats and BU College Republicans to break down the issues.
Yes, thank you very much, Alex and Laney. We're going to round out our show today with a panel discussion with two members of Boston University political organizations. I'm joined in this panel by Sean Waddington from BU College Democrats and Braden Jones, Vice President of BU College Republicans. We're going to cover a series of topics that had the biggest impact on the election. We'll start first with a question on the economy. So inflation was a major issue in this election. With Democrats in control, many Republicans blamed President Biden for the country's recent economic struggles. So, Braden, how well do you think Republicans use the economy to gain voters on the campaign trail?
Sure. Usually during an election, when the economy is an issue, it is the issue. And historically, the Republican Party has been the party that people turn to during the times of economic struggle. Given that and the results of the election, I would say that the Republican Party failed to seize upon the situation.
And Sean, so how well do you think Democrats did at addressing economic concerns?
I think they did an okay job. I think a huge thing that we've seen throughout history is that Democrats are the one that responds to economic crises going back to the 1930s and the New Deal with FDR, with massive stimulus packages that address the actual concern of what the economy is, which is people's pockets are hurting from rising prices. And so I think Democrats did an okay job of trying to tout the Inflation Reduction Act, something that the Republicans all opposed. I don't think it was the Democrats' main issue. It wasn't the main thing they talked about, but it was definitely something that they did a pretty well job on, as we see from the results.
And so sticking with economic policy, I want to ask the two of you about Massachusetts ballot questions 1. But first, Chika Okoye breaks it down for us.
Ballot question 1, referred to by some as the Fair Share Amendment, considers whether the state should add an additional tax on income over $1 million. If passed, the act would replace the current flat tax system with a tiered system, similar to the federal government. This means that for every dollar earned over $1 million would be taxed by an additional 4%. The millionaire's tax has been debated for years, and now voters must decide if they believe the ultra-rich should be, quote, paying their fair share, or if this is just punishment for the wealthy's successes. Voting yes means amending the state's constitution to create and enshrine a tax into law. Voting no means no amendment and no tax hike. Supporters of the tax say that it will allow Massachusetts to improve the MBTA and the public education system. Backers include several Massachusetts teacher unions, broader labor unions, and Democratic candidate Maura Healey. Opponents, however, like Republican nominee Jeff Deal, say that Massachusetts has enough tax money as is. Other business owners say question 1 is not fair and would be an, quote, economic drain.
Thanks for that, Chika. We want to start off with you, Sean. We've heard calls from progressive lawmakers to tax the rich. Could Massachusetts' choice to implement the surtax be the catalyst for its implementation in more places across the country or at federal level, and why?
Absolutely. I think we might see a replication of some of the successful tactics, because obviously this worked. And in different states like California, we've seen ballot measures that propose increased taxes for certain social issues, whether it be homelessness or electric vehicles. They haven't been as successful as this one in Massachusetts. So was it the topic? Was it public education? Was it the orange line being on fire that caused people to realize we need money for public transportation? What was it about the campaign? We were luckily, at BU College Democrats, we were lucky to have folks from Fair Share come talk to us. So what about this campaign that they did? What grassroots things did they do that were successful? And I think we're going to see a dissection and a replication of that over the coming years.
Yeah.
And so, Braden, Republicans have been outspoken against the millionaire's tax. Now that voters have voted in favor of question 1, what issues do you see coming out of this decision?
I think the main point that a lot of people are going to highlight is how this is going to affect small businesses. There's a lot of concern over how much this is going to dip into, or the 4% is going to dip into that amount over $1 million, and how that's going to affect not only savings but livelihoods.
Yeah, I'd just like to push back on that and again remind folks that it's a flat tax, it's an income tax, not a business tax. Small businesses will be okay, they will be unaffected because it's not a business tax, it's an income tax. Small business owners who make income, they're going to see exactly what the tax says. Their 1 millionth and first dollar is going to receive an extra 4% surtax. And so I think we can see how much that's going to affect them, and it's not an issue that will affect small businesses.
Braden, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think we also need to be cautious of how we go about encouraging these business owners to, not only business owners, but these people who earn more money to continue earning more money. Obviously, it's a reward to earn that money. These people, I would say for the most part, work hard to achieve that money, and we don't want to discourage them in their efforts.
Finally, we want to finish off speaking about Massachusetts ballot question 4. Sydney Topp is here to explain what it meant for the voters at the polls.
Ballot question 4 concerns whether Massachusetts should issue driver's licenses to undocumented immigrants. Earlier this year, Massachusetts legislators passed a bill allowing undocumented immigrants to apply for driver's licenses over Governor Charlie Baker's veto. Soon after, however, a group named Fair and Secure Massachusetts was able to put the question on the ballot, where voters will decide whether this law is implemented or repealed. If passed, undocumented immigrants can apply for driver's licenses and learner's permits, starting next July if they meet all identification requirements. They would also need to provide one of 5 additional documents. A yes vote would make Massachusetts the 18th state to allow undocumented immigrants to receive licenses. A no vote would repeal the law. Opponents, including Republican nominee Jeff Deal, say allowing this will lead to increased voter fraud and will reward migrants who break the law. Supporters, on the other hand, argue that the bill will increase safety on the roads and allow further rights to undocumented immigrants.
So passage of this bill makes Massachusetts the 18th state to allow undocumented immigrants to receive licenses. Based on what we have seen in states like New York and Rhode Island, what do you expect to see in Massachusetts, and how do you think this will particularly impact younger, undocumented students who aren't otherwise able to get their license? Braden, I'll start with you.
Yeah, hopefully this encourages them to pursue citizenship in the United States. Being able to be mobile and drive a vehicle is such a key part of our society, and to do it safely, which is what these licenses would allow them to do.
And Sean, what are your thoughts on the impact?
Yeah, I completely agree. This is a huge thing for safety. We're talking about some of the most marginalized folks are now able to learn how to drive, and in today's society that is huge. We have infrastructure built around cars and crumbling infrastructure when it comes to public transportation, as we talked about earlier. So this is an issue of access, this is an issue of equity, and this is absolutely amazing that we are incorporating some of the most marginalized folks in our communities onto our streets and doing so safely.
Well, Sean and Braden, thank you so much for joining me today. Now I'm going to give it back over to Alex and Laney at the desk.
Thanks so much, Kiara, and thank you again to Braden Jones and Sean Waddington for joining us. That's going to do it here for Your Vote, Your Voice 2022.
Before we go, we want to extend a special thank you to our advisors, Jake Casson, Tristan Ollie, Marissa Dianis, Adam Boyaji, and Professor Tina McDuffie.
And on behalf of all of our crew here in Studio West, we want to thank you for tuning into our show today. I'm Alex Dowd.
And I'm Laney Broussard. Stay safe and have a good night.